Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Simon du Plessis. I'm the Commercial Director for IT and CloudClevr. With me is my colleague, Ross.
Hello. Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. My name is Ross Spacey. I am a technical account manager here at CloudClevr. My job role is to help businesses align technology with their goals.
So today we're going to tackle one of the biggest IT challenges this year. It feels like we're talking about it every day, and we have less than a month left. So if you haven't done anything about it yet, today we're going to just go through a few considerations that might help you make a decision. Windows 10 is going end of life. Ross, what does that mean for customers?
Yeah, so the end of Windows 10 is a major technical milestone, but it's also a great opportunity to kind of make sure your IT is helping to drive the business forward as well. And I think it's worth emphasizing that it's not just a routine update. You know, the date of 14th of October 2025, it's a fixed end of support date. And our goal today is more to frame it as not necessarily a problem, but more of a genuine opportunity to businesses to kind of modernize, improve the security, boost productivity for teams, just an opportunity to even zoom out and kind of look at the bigger picture. While we're undertaking these upgrades across the estate, could it be a good time to assess migration to full cloud managed, for example? So yeah, we'll be looking at a few different paths you can take. As with anything in IT, there is no true one-size-fits-all. So the right choice kind of depends on your specific use cases, existing infrastructure, and of course your organization's cloud strategy overall.
So Ross, we've seen it time and time again. Even today on a couple of calls we've had together, Windows 10 is still in place. Looking at a survey Microsoft did in July, 54% of devices are still running Windows 10. Can you think of a few reasons why?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say the most common reasons that we encounter is probably dependency on legacy software or, thereabouts of not being aware that it's compatible. It could be, a bespoke finance application or an older version of some kind of, design suite, for example. Doesn't necessarily state on the requirements is supported on Windows 11, if that makes sense. And then another key reason is specialized hardware. So diagnostic equipment or manufacturing controllers, where they're tied to the device rather than, what was originally installed on.
So a big reason, really the main reason, is compliance and the security risks that are associated with not receiving updates. If we think about Windows 7 or Windows 8, went end of life, there were a number of really well-publicized hacks that happened right after that date. Thinking about the NHS as a good example. So some of the threat actors are actually holding back some of the vulnerabilities that they're aware of until that date is hit. So it's really important to get this addressed.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously after the deadline, once Microsoft kind of, stop releasing those security patches for Windows 10, it means that any new vulnerabilities discovered, what we would call CVEs or common vulnerability exposures, they will remain unpatched forever. And as you say, threat actors will actively develop exploits for published CVEs. So if you're continuing to use the base Windows 10, it effectively means that you're running an operating system with known and growing number of security holes. It just makes it an easy target.
And if you're in an industry where there's a lot of regulatory requirements, I'm thinking of FCA, for example, or SRA, if you're in the legal industry, or even just the basic trying to pass your cyber essentials, you will not be able to pass it if you have Windows 10 devices. So again, we need to just deal with it.
Finally, and probably the most common reason is just simply down to budgeting, right? So, it could be as simple as a large hardware refresh wasn't planned for that financial year. Businesses are trying to kind of, maximize the life of their current assets.
And we've got a few ideas on how to address that we'll go through in a couple of slides. One last thing just to think about as well is actual performance and how legacy equipment is impacting on your users. Every time John, an account, comes into the office, he needs to wait 5 minutes for his machine to boot up, while it's a cup of tea. That time adds up over a year. And imagine that across your whole organization. If you've got 100 users times 5 minutes every day, I can't do the math in my head, but that's a lot of time.
Absolutely. And then again, it's the other side of it as well, right? The day-to-day use, not just the boot times. With slow aging devices, you got that kind of hidden cost of old hardware being the issue. So it's not just about that slow startup time. It's, older hardware, especially with insufficient RAM, for example, slower hard drives or disks, the device will really struggle with, especially with today's software, which would just lead to constant, small delays or struggling with multitasking, opening large files. It really adds up and kind of impacts productivity.
So now we're going to give you all the solutions. Option one, upgrading and replacing. So Windows 11 has been around for a good while now. And I think compatibility with most software vendors has been covered. It includes quite a few nice AI features. Copilot is now integrated into everything. I don't know how I would ever survive without Copilot anymore. Security, that's another point. It's been greatly improved. There's updates are being released on a more frequent basis. There's performance enhancements that have come into place. Battery life has been extended. Boot times have been sped up. I think overall, it's just a much better put together package.
Absolutely. I view Windows 11 as, more built in security. And there's a big reason, I believe it's 62% drop in security incidents where, I think Windows 11 is a big factor for that because it's built on a secure by design principle, right? So it's more advanced because it's built to work with modern hardware, and I think that's why the requirements are a little bit higher than what they have been historically. But yeah, it's more advanced because it's built to work with modern hardware. So it uses features like VBS to protect login details and other critical parts of this operating system in a separate secure area, which makes it much harder for malware to access them.
That's a really good point, Ross. I think you just need to keep in mind that it's either replacing the hardware or upgrading what you have in place at the moment. Now, like Ross mentioned, not all hardware supports it. We run audits across our customer base where we can highlight what equipment can support Windows 11, what equipment needs to be replaced. But it's also worth keeping in mind that you might have a 5-year-old laptop that will support Windows 11, but it's still 5 years old. It will probably be quite slow. It might meet the minimum requirements, but your user performance will be impacted.
Absolutely. So, yeah, just to add on to your point there about Copilot, key factors in these new Copilot Plus PCs, they now come with dedicated hardware to run AI tasks. Features like live translation in meetings or finding a document with I believe it's the recall feature, I think it's called. Big fan of it either way. It's much faster and much more efficient overall. So as a side note, it's also processed on the device itself, which is always a big plus for security too.
So let's look at some of the hardware requirements. Now, we're not strictly following the Microsoft guidelines here. We've slightly enhanced the recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Ross, if you could go through some of the security aspects.
Sure. So I understand a lot of this probably sounds like technical jargon on first glance, but so the top part, so TPM2 there, so it's a hardware requirement, and it's directly tied to the security features which we're going to mention. But TPM2 is a secure physical hardware chip, and it's built onto each device that essentially provides a root of trust, and it generates and stores keys for features like BitLocker, which is essentially just disk encryption, and also allows you to use things such as Windows Hello authentication, so fingerprint, facial recognition, just biometrics, which is a really nice feature. But yeah, the issue with that is because it's a physical aspect of the upgrade. A lot of what we find is a lot of Windows 10 PCs, because it wasn't historically a requirement, don't have that chip. So again, definitely worth finding out.
So what that basically means in English is if you lose your laptop in the pub, no one can access your data because it's encrypted.
There's a password on there. You can't just plug in the hard drive and find all those files.
Exactly. Now, looking at the memory and the disk space requirements, we've helped, I think it's about 95% of our client base migrate to Microsoft 365 and using SharePoint and OneDrive as the main source for their company data and sharing between users. When working offline, so when you're on the train, plane, or you're traveling, you're in a customer meeting, and you need offline access to those files, your data is synchronized and stored locally on that endpoint. The minimum requirement is 64 gig of storage, but we really say, clients, you should really have a 256 gig, and the price difference is not that much.
Minimal. Absolutely.
Again, if you're an existing CloudClevr customer, we can run an audit across your infrastructure and very quickly highlight to you which devices are compliant, which devices you can upgrade, and which you should really think about replacing.
Yeah, and I think that should always be the first step. So it's not always going to be a case of assuming a full hardware replacement is needed across the whole company, because it would it's cost a fortune, especially if you got recently purchased devices. In the past few years, TPM chips have been standard, right? So yeah. A thorough audit, I would say, is the essential first step. as you just mentioned, for CloudClevr customers, we do this through a scripted process just to check eligibility. And it just essentially allows you to create a precise, more data-driven, budget based on which devices are compliant and which will need to be replaced in the end.
So let's look at the next option. And this one is a bit more exciting. Microsoft Azure, Azure Virtual Desktop, and Cloud PC Windows 365. Ross, can you, at a high level, explain what the differences are between these two options?
Absolutely. Depends how high level you want. But the example I always use is, so Windows 365, I always refer to it as almost like leasing a car, right? So you get a dedicated, ready-to-go Cloud PC, monthly cost, it's simple, it's predictable. Whereas AVD or Azure Virtual Desktop, it's more like a car sharing service with your colleagues, right? So it's highly customizable and can actually be, in some cases, more cost effective, especially if you have, more users who can actually share those resources. But to answer the question properly, I'd say it really depends on business needs. So AVD would be the better fit for flexibility and complexity. So if you've got custom applications or you need to support a fluctuating number of users, AVD is probably is definitely the more powerful choice. And you only pay for the computing resource which you actually consume. And then again, on the other hand, Windows 365, in my mind, I view it all about simplicity. So like I mentioned, you get the dedicated cloud PC for each licensed user, fixed monthly predictable cost. And it's just a fantastic fit if you're business applications are already in the cloud and, you want an easy to manage solution.
That's a good way to explain it. I think it's, if you're, let's say, a 30-user organization and all you use the Microsoft Office 365 suite of applications, Outlook, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and you might use a couple of cloud apps. You might have, Sage Cloud, Salesforce, or, you've got a CRM hosted in the cloud. Windows 365 is a really good solution because all of your devices are set up in exactly the same way. If you've got users working from personal devices as well, they can log into that environment and you don't need to really worry about the security they've got on that private device. If you've got on-premise legacy servers running applications that there is no SaaS or cloud solution for yet, we can migrate those servers into Microsoft Azure, and then you would move into the Azure Virtual Desktop solution where, as Ross mentioned, it's a lot more customizable. If you've got users located across the world, you might have shift workers. That's a really good solution because the resource can be spun up. So you might have in the morning when there's at 5 o'clock in the morning when there's only 5 users working, you can have one server running. At 9 a.m. when 200 users log on, additional virtual service will just be spun up. Just for the workday at 5 p.m., those machines will be gradually shut down, and it's the most cost-effective way of doing it.
Yeah, and it's really easy to tailor, isn't it? And kind of put in those rules. So, client I was working with previously, they had an archive business application essentially, and it was very rare that staff actually needed the access. But because I think it kind of boils down to almost like a mindset change in some cases, because historically it's been always accessible because it's again hosted on-prem. It was quite a demanding application and had a lot of data on there. So the workaround with that was almost changing that mindset to, okay, so it's so rare that we have to actually, jump onto that server. In reality, we don't need it on all the time, so we can kind of cost save there as well. So they ended up actually collated all of the requests where they need to go back through this archive data. And then on a Friday is when the PC would boot up, the Azure PC, and that's when all the staff would kind of, go through and collect and get everything that needed on that one day. And again, it saves you for paying. It's pay for what you use at the end of the day, right?
2 more points to mention on that. One is business continuity and disaster recovery. So if you've got your old Windows 10 or even older devices, and you've got legacy servers on site, this gets you away from having all your risk and all your eggs in one basket. If you've migrated your servers into Azure, your site goes offline, there's a power outage, your internet is down, users can work from anywhere with a good, reliable internet connection. And then the second bit, when you sign up for either of these solutions, you get extended support for Windows 10 included automatically, which means it sort of delays you having to worry about this. So if you've got 100 users, this is that you need to upgrade or replace hardware, this is a really good solution to think about. Right, so at the beginning of this month, Microsoft released ESU, so extended support, which means for the privilege of £45 for year one, you can extend and be provided with updates for Windows 10 for another year. You can see where this is going. Year 2, the price doubles. Year 3, the price doubles again. And if you add all of that up, it's the price of a new laptop. So if you haven't budgeted for it, you've got 100 users or more, then this might be the way to go for year 1 while you work on your strategy. It just gives you a little bit of time, a little bit of breathing space.
I think, yeah, the way I view ESU is more as a middle ground, if you like. So I like to use the term expensive plaster as an analogy. So it's perfect because ESUs are very limited, and they only cover the critical and important security updates. So you don't get any of the other fixes. So quality of life improvements or Microsoft technical support. So yeah, it's meant more of a temporary fix to essentially buy you more time as an organization. It's not a real solution. In short, you'd be paying for an annually doubling fee simply to patch the now legacy operating system of Windows 10 against the more secure security threats, but you're gaining none of the benefits of a modern platform like Windows 11.
Exactly that. So you're not fixing your problem, you're just pushing it a little bit further on.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the next option to think about if budget is a concern and you don't have the CapEx available is, can we move this to more of an OpEx problem? If you've got any FDs on the call, you can do the wizardry and see how you can shift money around. But we can offer device as a service as in a few different ways. One is if you're a standard support customer already, we can provide a device to you on a fixed monthly fee per user, which if you add that over a 3-year cycle, it's actually less than what a new laptop would cost you, because there is residual value in that laptop towards the end. So when you return that laptop to us, that goes into secondary markets after being securely wiped. And that's quite nice from a green perspective as well, because you can show that you're recycling equipment and it's being reused. What we're also doing is we're including it into some of our support packages. So for example, we offer a solution where you pay a monthly fee per user, which includes your support, any of the licensing of the security products, and each user also receives a new laptop, and that's refreshed every 3 years as well. So if you wanted really simple pricing structure, you don't ever want to think about IT or budgeting, you just want to know exactly what you're paying per month, we have an option that will cover that as well.
Yeah, I think from an IT operations standpoint as well, the other benefit to add is standardization, which is always nice. So with the device as service model, you get a consistent modern hardware fleet. Everyone's on the same kind of level of device. Again, you can still have the exception of I usually refer to them as enhanced users with slightly higher specs. So again, they might require more RAM, for example, or more storage. And it's also ideal for making modern deployment technologies like autopilot with its zero-touch provisioning actually effective. So it kind of eliminates the usual driver and compatibility issues which we often run into with mixed age, mixed manufacturer fleet of devices. So a mix of Dell, Lenovo, etc. So yeah, it kind of gives you that level to stand on.
And also just the flexibility it gives you. You used an example earlier today where you've got a new starter at home. We courier a new laptop to that user's home. They log in for the first time, and it gets automatically provisioned for them. Everything gets set up. The application gets downloaded. For me, from a new user perspective and onboarding a staff member, it's quite a nice touch. Brand new
Seamless.
Laptop and log in first time, and everything just works. Doesn't need to come to your office, be joined to the domain, then get set up, get couriered to the IT provider, then get couriered to the user. It's just nice, simple, and easy.
Hands off.
So just to reiterate again, October the 14th, Windows 10 is going end of life. If you haven't dealt with it yet, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. We've put together a migration checklist you can download by scanning the QR code on the screen at the moment. And if you'd like a tailored assessment of your environment, or you'd like to register your interest, please do that. Don't leave it any longer. Just reach out to us. We're happy to help. Thank you for your time and have a lovely day.